Chapter 32. It hadn't taken long for one of the soldiers to get free and untie the others, and Schaefer and Rash hadn't tied the knots all that tight to begin with, but Phillips kept rubbing at his wrists as he sat in the copter. He'd gotten reports over the radio, heard how Detective Rash had smashed his way out of captivity, how he'd made off with a cache of heavy weapons, and he didn't need to be a genius to figure out what that meant. Schaefer and Rash were planning to fight the aliens, even if it meant a goddamn war. Phillips couldn't figure out how the hell Schaefer and Rash had worked it out, how they'd communicated when they were both being held in protective custody, but somehow or other they must have planned it all. He still remembered Schaefer standing there on the rooftop saying, "Jesus, Rash, where the hell have you been?" Schaefer had expected Rash, had known what was happening, and he, Phillips, the supposed intelligence big shot, hadn't had a clue. And then there was the mask. The agents who'd picked Rash up and held him while Phillips was off in Latin America said that Rash had had one of the aliens' face masks. And they hadn't done anything with it. A piece of the alien technology had been right there in their hands, and they hadn't done anything with it. And when Rash broke out, when an out-of-shape New York cop took two highly trained federal agents by surprise and beat the crap out of them, he took the mask with him. The thing was gone again. Phillips didn't even know why Rash wanted it, where he'd gotten it. He didn't know anything. And those goddamn shit agents didn't know either. They'd never even bothered to ask Rash about it, never asked him a damn thing. Christ, Phillips thought. What a bunch of fuck-ups. This whole thing was going bad. No, it had started out bad, it was getting worse. It was, in fact, going straight down the tubes. They didn't have a damn thing to give the aliens. And they never had, not really. The aliens took what they wanted. They'd taken back their dead companion, and when they wanted Schaefer, they'd take him too. And they hadn't even shown up for the rendezvous. Phillips' men had been transmitting every kind of signal they could think of as bait to get the monsters interested, and as far as Phillips could see, the aliens hadn't paid any attention. They must have known what was going on. They could have had someone at the heliport if they'd wanted to. So they didn't want to. They didn't want Schaefer as a gift. If they wanted him at all, they wanted him on their own terms. Maybe they didn't want him. Maybe the one who tagged him was the one he'd killed, and the others didn't give a shit. Too goddamn many maybes. The truth, Phillips finally admitted to himself, was that he and his experts didn't know a damn thing about what the aliens thought, or how they thought. The Schaefer boys had both seemed to have something of a handle on it though, for all the good that did. And Schaefer had wanted to fight back. He'd thought that just waiting for the bastards to leave was a mistake. He'd thought that trying to propitiate them as if they were a bunch of little gods was a mistake. Maybe Schaefer was right. The president had said they couldn't afford to fight, but what did he know? He'd also said he trusted Phillips's judgment, and right now Phillips judged that Schaefer was right. They couldn't afford not to fight. For one thing, Schaefer and Rash were out there somewhere with a van load of heavy weapons, and they were going to fight. A fight was going to happen. It couldn't be stopped. And as far as Phillips was concerned, if he couldn't stop the fight from happening, then his job was to do everything he could to help the right side win. He didn't really think he could pull it off. How could he fight a bunch of invisible spaceships, fight monsters with shoulder-mounted energy cannons? But he had to try. Schaefer and Rash were trying. They were out there fighting back somehow. And Schaefer, who seemed to understand how the aliens thought better than anyone else except maybe Dutch, didn't think it was suicide. He didn't think they were going to lose New York. Or maybe he did expect to die, did expect to lose New York, and didn't care. Schaefer was a crazy bastard. Dutch had been stubborn, but Schaefer was just plain nuts. Maybe that was why he could understand the aliens. Maybe they were crazy the same way he was. Maybe he was more like them than he was like an ordinary man. Maybe that was why they tagged him. Phillips shook his head. It didn't matter now why they tagged Schaefer. It didn't matter why they'd come to New York instead of staying in the tropics. All that mattered was that the final showdown was coming, and Phillips' job was to get whatever force he could out there to help. He couldn't get the entire army in on this. There wasn't time. But he could at least put together enough to let those damn monsters know that they'd been in a fight. "Turn on the damn radio," he told the pilot. "Get me Washington."